وآله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear excellent brothers, sisters, colleagues from all over the world. Such an honor to be with all of you. Thank you so much for joining us this Saturday. And I know in Australia it's Sunday actually, so greetings to you as well. It's an honor to be with all of you. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sayyid Jamaluddin, and together with Sister Fatima from Canada and Sister Shireen from South Africa, we're honored to host you as part of the ISIP, the International Students of Islamic Psychology. We welcome all of you members, brothers and sisters from all over the world to benefit from our international lecture series, inshallah. So we'll start with a short presentation, and afterwards we will present our speaker of today, which is our dear excellent scholar and brother, Dr. Fahad Khan. We're very honored to have him with us today. So Bismillah. Today's session will be about incorporating the vices and virtues, the Muhlikat and Munjiyat, in clinical practice, together with dear Dr. Fahad Khan from US. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today's agenda is that we'll just recite Surah Al-Fatiha and then go through some guidelines. We want to share a certificate of appreciation to all of you, members of ISIP, and all of you who join our lectures. And then we'll have we have also a certificate of appreciation to Dr. Fahad, of course. Then we will do the lecture with Dr. Fahad. It will be about 50 to 1 hour's lecture. And afterwards, we will offer some minutes for Q&As. And then we'll share a form for feedback and just do some closing du'as, inshallah. Just briefly, Zoom etiquettes. We will not allow the microphones to be on when we ask questions during the Q&A. So feel free to write your questions in the Zoom chat, and then during the Q&As, we will address them to Dr. Fahad, inshallah. Please don't record or do any screenshots from the recording. We will offer Dr. Fahad's slides afterwards to all of you who have registered through the email registration link. We have asked Dr. Fahad for the permission to share his slide, and he has been very generous to share them with us, inshallah. Yes, live transcriptions, by the way. If you have a need for live transcriptions, please press the more button, and from there you just press the request, and we will be happy to provide that for you as well if you need that. Jazakallah khairan. A little bit about ISIP's mission statement, dear excellent brothers and sisters. We try to be an inclusive space designed to connect people with diverse backgrounds interested in the field of Islamic psychology, and we aim to disseminate knowledge, share resources, and discuss best practices in a free and accessible manner. And we also want to be a platform to enable further development of people's personal and professional interests, studies, and understanding of Islamic psychology within their communities and countries of origin. And if you want to contribute to the movement and to participate or to become a member of the movement, feel free to join our website, isip.foundation. There you can get membership, and you will then have access to our digital library with over 1,000 resources, articles, lectures within the field of Islamic psychology and Muslim mental health. You can subscribe to our ISIP YouTube channel, where you can have access to all of our lectures. We organize lectures in many different languages. So we do lectures in English and Turkish and Arabic and Urdu and Malayalam and Bahasa Indonesian. And we're about to also do lectures in Russian and in Farsi and in many other languages as well. We have both local chapters and regional chapters besides our international umbrella. So if you want to be part of our local chapters, feel free to connect with us. Sister Fatima will add our email address in the Zoom chat. It's contact@isip.foundation. And the same goes if you want to be part of our task forces. So we have regional chapters in Pakistan and India and Bangladesh and Malaysia, Indonesia, you name it. So feel free to join. And also we have resource sharing groups on WhatsApp, where we do a lot of resource sharing articles, lectures, seminars, conferences within the field of Islamic psychology. We will share the link in the Zoom chat for you to join and benefit from the resource sharing from different organizations from all over the world. This is a little bit briefly about how you can participate and become a member in the movement. So let's now move forward to the presenter and the speaker of today's lecture. We're very honored to host Dr. Fahad Khan. He is a licensed clinical psychologist with a doctorate in clinical psychology, master's degree in biomedical sciences, Hafiz of the Quran, having committed the entire Quran to memory. Subhanallah, amazing. Currently studying at Darul Qasim, Arabic and Islamic Studies, under the supervision of Sheikh Amin Khulwadia. He's also a faculty member at Concordia University, Chicago, and College DuPage, published book chapters and articles on traditionally Islamically integrated psychotherapy, the TIIP book, which we heavily recommend all of you to buy and purchase. It's really one of the great books on how to apply Islamic psychology in your clinical practice as practitioners. And he has also written a lot of articles regarding the effects of acculturation and religiosity on psychological distress. He's a fellow of the International Association of Islamic Psychology, serves as an editor for the Journal of Muslim Mental Health. He's part of the Khalil Center, which is an organization, a center who provides Islamic psychotherapy and counseling in North America. And we're very honored to also have you, Dr. Fahad, as part of our advisory board at ISIP, the International Students of Islamic Psychology, and as our supervisor, by the way. We're very honored to have you and to get your nasiha and to learn from you. This is, Dr. Fahad, just a certificate of appreciation to you for all the time and efforts and in recognition of your continuing excellency and excellence in the field of Islamic psychology, signed by Sister Fatima and myself. We will email this to you, and we hope that we will continue to work and collaborate with you, dear Ustad. We're honored to be your students and learn from you, inshallah. We'll also want to just highlight our upcoming lecture. Sunday, the 10th of April, we will have a lecture with Dr. Samir Mahmood from Australia and from the Cambridge Muslim College. He will give more a presentation and a thorough lecture regarding the dream interpretation tradition within the Islamic thought, and yeah, we're really looking forward to learn from him. Actually, this has been a request from many of you. You have been written to us, connecting to us, asking for more lectures when it comes to the Islamic tradition of dream interpretation. So we're really looking forward to learn from our excellent Murabbi and teacher, Dr. Samir Mahmood from Australia. We also want to just say Ramadan Mubarak to all of you. If we don't speak with each other before Ramadan, please keep us in your du'as, and please forgive us for any of our shortcomings, and all the good comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all the mistakes are solidly ours. We pray that the love and the blessings of this holy month of Ramadan are showered upon you and your loved ones, inshallah, from all of your colleagues, brothers and sisters from the ISIP movement, inshallah. Thank you for attending, and please forgive us once more for your shortcomings. And before we start, let's just recite Surah Al-Fatiha, inshallah. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Malik Yawmiddin, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'een, Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim, Sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim, ghayril maghdubi alayhim wala daalin. Ameen. Sadaqallahu azim. Without any further ado, let me stop sharing my screen so you can share yours, dear Ustad. We want everybody to give a round of digital applause to our excellent teacher and scholar, Dr. Fahad Khan. The floor is yours. Most welcome.
Jazakallah khair, Jamal. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala, wa tu'izzu man tasha, wa tudhillu man tasha bi yadika al-khair. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. And I'm very thankful to my beloved Jamal, and also to ISIP. I think if anybody wants to see how a passion of an individual can grow and can bring fruits to an organization, this is one that you're looking at right now. So, mashallah, of course, we give thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the work that Brother Jamal and his team has put into this organization and organizing these events, it's something to be proud of, alhamdulillah. You know, I will ask for your apologies that I have a infection in my throat, so that's why I sound a little off. Also, I'm coming with very little sleep because there's a wedding happening in my house. So please forgive me if there's any kind of shortcomings, if I misspeak or if I say anything that is not meant to be. And if I do say something that sounds confusing, please do contact me afterwards. I will share my contact information at the end. Feel free to email me and contact me, and I will clarify, inshallah, or just to be in touch, feel free to contact me. So this topic, importance and applications of Munjiyat and Muhlikat in psychology, is a very important and dear topic to me, as well as to Khalil Center, as well as to the movement of Islamic psychology. Because as a part of Islamic psychology, we we allow people, and we present the tradition of our Islamic scholars in the past when they treated psychology and psychological illnesses, how they looked at human being. And unfortunately, the world that we live in, the human being is looked at as a in a very mechanistic manner, in which the presence and absence of a disorder determines whether the person is sick or healthy, right? And and this statement is not that something that's completely off. I mean, absolutely, I think presence and absence of a disorder is an important factor in helping someone. There's no doubt about it. However, on the other hand, what happens with that approach is that we end up not considering very important factors when looking at a human being. So now this presentation, I'd like to usually start with a brief, you can say, kind of giving you some context behind this presentation. So this first few minutes, about 10, 15 minutes we'll spend, is a presentation that you probably have seen me do many times before. But I'm repeating myself again because I think it's an important aspect, an important reminder for us. If we're students in Islamic psychology, if we're students in psychology, these are important reminders for us to keep in the back of our mind as we begin to talk about Muhlikat and Munjiyat. So, we have to look at how modern psychology theories were developed. I think what ends up happening is that when I was in school, for example, I went to a school which was a cognitive behavioral therapy aligned school, CBT, as most schools in the United States are. And my teacher was Dr. Arthur Freeman, who was a special student of Dr. Albert Ellis. And he had interviewed Ellis many times as well. And Dr. Freeman was one of the, you can say like a core pioneers of the field. And he'd written many, many books in many different languages, translated to many different languages. So my training was in CBT. I was, and every time you hear names like Albert Ellis and others, Aaron Beck in the cognitive movement, you end up, seeing these individuals as these great pioneers. And indeed they were. Their contributions aren't something that we need to look down upon. But I think what we end up doing is we associate and we end up either accidentally, sometimes unintentionally, reducing the human being down to the way these individuals characterize them. So if Freud talks about the presence of subconscious drives, and you're a psychodynamic clinician or practitioner or student, you might think that that is the best way, if not maybe perhaps the only way, to explain a human being. If you're a behaviorist, you have your own approach. If you're a cognitive clinician, you have your own approach. CBT, EFT, emotion focused therapy, they all have their own way of seeing the human being. And what we have to do as students, and I consider myself as a student as well in the field, is to be able to understand that these theories don't have a strong epistemological foundation. And this is why we see so many diversities, so much diversity, but it's not even just diversity. It's diversity with almost like this condemnation of the other side. So if you talk to somebody who's a CBT practitioner, oftentimes they look down upon those who are practicing in the psychodynamic field, and vice versa. So that level of hatred towards the others or animosity towards the others, sometimes, and it's extreme. I don't think all practitioners are that way, I think, but I think the idea that the other theory doesn't describe the human being in a way that they should be described, is something that's very prevalent throughout these cultures that are within the field of psychology. So it's a very unhealthy way to look at it. Whereas as Muslims, our aqidah is that all knowledge comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our aqidah is that when it comes to epistemology, there are sources of knowledge that we have to keep in mind, and we have to treat them in manner that has been deemed appropriate. So if you look at theories, for instance, and then I've spoken on this before, so I'm going to repeat myself a little bit here. You see almost like this parallel process happening where, as the worldviews developed in the world, due to pre-industrial time frame, and then when we move on to the industrial revolution, there's a change in it. We almost see that difference happening within the fields as well. So psychodynamic, being the first prominent approach, or psychoanalysis, to be more specific, Freudian psychoanalysis. It almost parallels, how these worldviews existed. In the beginning, there was a lack of concern for children, high mortality rate. Oftentimes children were left untreated, and then they kind of also the presence of original sin in the Catholic thought, as well as other philosophers who theorize that human beings are born evil, and they need to be disciplined. These are prominent worldviews at the time. Then we move on to as we progress through the time, we see philosophers talk about different approaches. Two of the conflicting ones that came one after another were the mechanistic approach by John Locke and organismic approach by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And and then we see a little bit of shift that's happening, right? So then we see a going from children being born evil to now children that are being born neutral, to now children that are being born with good. They are born pure, but they're corrupted by society. And we see the psychological movements kind of follow the same pattern as well. So as human beings, as Muslims, when we are asked a question about this, right? How do we approach it? Do we go back to what our Sheikh Freud or Sheikh Skinner said? No, we look at what does Allah and His Messenger say. If we find something in the book, in Quran or in Hadith, then and it has a solid grounding and a support to it, then we take it. Especially if it's something that's directly from the Quran or from the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But afterwards, if there's nothing there, so within Islam, there's a categorization of knowledge that is qat'i and that's dhanni, right? Qat'i meaning that's definitive. We know that this is a fact, whether it came from the Quran or whether it's something that is even observable, measurable. For example, gravity is a fact, right? Things that carry heavy masses have a certain gravitational force to them. So that's something that is, as far as we're concerned, it's qat'i knowledge. But coming back to the human being, we're talking about ontology and epistemology here. Coming back to human ontology, are people born good or evil? Are they born neutral? We have certain ayat and revelation that point to the fact that human beings are born good with good fitrah, right? And the fitrah, which is the nature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instills inside of us. So we go back to the Quran and see what's there. We go back to the Sunnah and see what's there. And if we can't find anything from these sources and from our past shuyukh, who also relied heavily on not only the scripture, but also on research, also on observations, also on our senses and data collection. This evidence-based approach was always there. Then we look at what they have to say. So the change of worldviews, then we move on to human beings now being studied, from human beings being ignored to human beings now being studied. And as this develops, especially through behaviorism, psychology is now moving towards becoming a science. In fact, nowadays, unfortunately, I say this with the grievance, because in an attempt to become a hard science or a science, psychology is what we like to call soft science, right? There are things that you can measure, there are things you can look at, there are things you can observe, but there are many things that you just cannot, right? How do you measure subconscious processes? How do you measure the level of emotion? You can ask an individual, how angry do you feel right now, between 0 and 10? But is that subjective measure of anger going to be the correct one? Is it objectively the case? And oftentimes we find that it is not. It's on their subjective understanding, their own subjective assessment of what's happening with them. And so psychology, in an attempt to become a hard science, has had to divorce itself from many aspects that are not measurable, right? So Watson was a behaviorist, and we saw this after the cognitive movement. The behaviorism really try to push, and now with the medical model and the medical movement and studies on brain, we're at a point where everything has to be measured, where everything has to be it has to fit through this scientific approach, right? So consciousness is a good example, right? So consciousness is it meant to be an inner experience. Now, the way we shift that approach to a hard science is that, we say, okay, every living being has his own inner experience. Every living being must always have had this inner experience. So the beginnings of mental life date from the beginnings of life, right? So everybody has had consciousness. Now, if consciousness is an inner experience, all psychology must begin with self-observation, which is recorded through experimentation. You see, this is where I start to have a problem. It's designed to expose involuntary reactions. This will then yield quantitative data, and psychology is a scientific study of mental life. So even something as consciousness, and there's a quote I think here from Professor William James, who said, we know the meaning of consciousness, so as long as no one asks us to define it, right? When we come down to, can you define what consciousness is? Can you measure what consciousness is? No one can do it, and it's understandable that no one can do it, because it's not meant to be something that you can quantify. Intelligence is not meant to be something that you can easily measure, right? Is IQ a good predictor of success in life? It is not. Is IQ a good predictor? My father, may Allah bless him, if he took the Wechsler adult intelligence scale, he would do very poorly, but he's more intelligent than I am. So how do we take something that is difficult to measure and attempt to measure it, and then apply it back to the individual as if we can make a definitive conclusion about that individual? So that's a problem that we have in psychology right now. Most of the theories came from untrained theorists, right? There weren't philosophers. Some of them might have a little bit of background in philosophy. Some of them may be physicians. Some had no background at all. But at the end of the day, we accept their theories, and we say, these people, whatever they said, must be true, right? So, psychodynamic approach talks about the presence of subconscious drives. We have names like Freud, Carl Jung, Erik Erikson. Human beings have this evil tendency. That's our nature is evil. We're born with these drives. The negative tendency. All behavior is because of unconscious, irrational, and instinctive forces. Like Freud talked about the id, ego, superego, and what drives that are the energies of Eros and Thanatos, for example. Humanistic approach with Rogers and Maslow says no, human beings have the capacity to self-actualize. Behaviorism says human beings have a blank slate. This tabula rasa concept that the environment is what shapes them. Now the cognitive movement comes in and tries to kind of reconcile between behaviorism and between like Freudian approach of cognition that are internal measurable processes. You can ask an individual, what are you thinking? And they will be able to tell you what they're thinking. Now, I will say, and Maulana Rumi and Allama Muhammad Iqbal talks about this idea that thought, when you have it in your mind, it has a different value, because it is something that is, it's like a cloud in the sky, right? It's hard to measure. Sometimes if your full sky is cloudy, you don't know how far up these clouds go. It's hard to look at it. It looks very complicated. But when you put that thought into words, then you end up reducing it. No words can ever explain a thought in the same way the thought exists. That's impossible, right? So you can ask someone what you're thinking about. You can ask someone how often you think about this, but that individual will not be able to explain it in a very accurate manner, their own thoughts. And that's something we have to recognize. But the cognitive movement tried to push that, right? You have people like Piaget and Vygotsky, and then the current approach with biological approach with genetics and physiology. So these reactionary theories formed also as a result of a reaction to something that was before. If one person said one thing, the other one came and they said, no, this is not how it's meant to be. This is how it's meant to be. And that's what we see right now. Again, that's problematic, right? So, someone will say, like Thomas said that, Skinner has an unbounded love for idea that there is no individual no agents, they're only organisms, right? That's how Skinner looked at, B.F. Skinner looked at the human beings. John B. Watson said anyone, regardless of their nature, can be trained to be anything. That was his, kind of like a call, that you can give me any individual, any child who's just born, and I can turn that baby into, whatever I'd like to be. This is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, if you look at this, for example, it says here that the individual must have mastered the lower needs, right? The physiological needs, for example, hunger, right? And if the hunger is still there, then the individual is not going to have any capacity to actualize. But we know that's not true. Who do we consider as probably the most actualized people within Islam? I would say Sufis, right? Sufis had a very high relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, had a strong connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you open, for example, Imam Qushayri's Risala, right, where he kind of summarizes all these Sufi concepts, and if you look at things like hunger, for example, or poverty, right? Poverty, faqr is seen, there's a quote that's attributed to the Prophet ﷺ that, faqri fakhri, right? My faqr, my poverty is my pride, right? Is seen something that is an important aspect of your life that is that's going to then actualize you and help you connect with the divine. Hunger, for example, Yahya bin Mu'adh said, like, hunger is just an exercise for the murid, for the beginning, those who aspire to be, ascetics. It's a trial for the repentant, and a discipline, for the world, for those who renounce the world, the zuhad, and it's a blessing for those who are, the arifun, those who have recognized are the Gnostics of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He also said hunger is a light, while satiation is fire. Appetite is like firewood by which the fire is kindled. It won't be extinguished until it consumes the one who has it, right? So hunger wasn't seen something as a basic need that you must go through, you must fulfill before you can begin to self-actualize. We're going into Ramadan, and one of the aspects of Ramadan is, less sleep and less eating. And we know that helps us spiritually, right? So the idea of spiritual perfection is something that we don't see in the field of psychology. And that's why we're talking about Muhlikat and Munjiyat today, right? We're stuck so much on these needs. We're stuck so much on and the system that's created, especially in the West. What research is going to be funded? What concepts are going to be studied? What is going to be published is determined by a big power struggle. There's a big power hierarchy here. And that is also through money, so, the insurance companies in the West would not like it if the person goes to therapy for, 5-10 years, like most psychodynamic therapies are. They wouldn't like it if people are now beginning to treat spiritual illnesses, because for them, they're losing money. Everybody has a spiritual illness. I have a spiritual illness. Jamal has one. Everybody has it. This is the nature of reality of who we are. No one here is perfect. The Sahaba had spiritual illnesses. They talked about these spiritual illnesses, but this approach is something that is holding us back, and we're moving with whatever the flow of time is. Allama Iqbal, he's my spiritual mentor. He challenges psychologists, right? He says in Urdu, "Jurat hai tu afkar ki dunya se guzar ja, hai behr khudi mein abhi poshida jazire." That if you have the courage, if you dare, then go beyond this world of thought. At the time, his time, and even after him, the cognitive movement was picking, and also the idea of like people were kind of philosophizing and coming up with these concepts. And he says in this ocean of khudi, which is a concept that he has of the selfhood, there are still many hidden islands, right? You're going to find so many different places and things that nobody has ever looked at or ever studied. And he says, how do you get to that? He says, "Khulte nahi is khul zam khamosh ke asrar, jab tak tu ise zarbe kalimi se na chire." That these silent seas will keep these mysteries hidden from you. They're not going to open up to you until you take the rod of Moses, until you take the staff of Musa alayhi salam, and then you strike it. What is the significance of the staff of Musa alayhi salam? This is a divine power that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to Musa alayhi salam. It comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Iqbal is alluding that if you want to if you want to look at the hidden secrets of a human being, if you want to study human ontology, you have to use the guidance provided to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Otherwise, you're not going to find, what you're going to be stuck in, whatever the world is presenting to you based on power dynamics and different theories and different poles that we are kind of part of. We see psychology being pulled into so many different directions right now, right? Almost like the psychology field is losing its own foundation, right? It's going to crumble. You'll see it one day, it will crumble. And we're seeing it crumbling right now. Look at the state of mental health in US and in Australia and other countries as well, which are developed. So we need that approach, and we need that guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we see some of that happening in psychology too. Like when we talk about Muhlikat and Munjiyat, vices and virtues, there is a shift within the field of psychology towards positive psychology. And I think positive psychology is one area which does a fairly good job of bringing this to light. Like, what are some of the virtues and characteristics that we need to develop? Character strengths and virtues. This is Seligman's model, right? He talks about these character strengths of wisdom and knowledge and humanity and justice and temperance, transcendence and courage, right? And how these play a role in human character development, and why is it important to strengthen our character, right? So we see that shift happening within positive psychology. But I will say it again, that shift is not, I don't know, Allahu A'lam, what's in Seligman's heart and why he came up with these, or even others who practice positive psychology. But I would be surprised if there wasn't a reactionary mechanism there as well. There was a reaction to something that was happening in psychology. And again, Muslims don't react, right? We're not meant to, although I'll take that statement back. Nowadays, Muslims do react, unfortunately, but we're not meant to be reactive, right? We're meant to have a strong foundation through which anything that comes to us, then we go back to. So the Islamic tradition has always talked about this, right? The hadith of Rasulullah إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, right? So he said, I was sent to perfect, to complete, a character, to beautify character, to make it a complete. And he himself was kind of khuluqul Quran, right? His character was the Quran, as Aisha radiallahu anha said. So this idea of character reformation through Muhlikat and Munjiyat is a concept that is embedded in the Islamic tradition, beginning with Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and in the Quran as well, right? I like this picture because it talks about all the some of the ways that you can beautify your character through some of the ayat that we see in this photo. Now we had people like Imam Birgawi, rahimahullah, who wrote in the Tariqa Muhammadiyya, and he talked about some of these concepts like self-indulgence and blind imitation, hypocrisy, arrogance, envy, anger, avarice, wastefulness, humility, and the munjiyat being humility, forbearance, generosity, and detachment. How come the psychology field doesn't talk about this, right? Do we have a disorder that talks about hypocrisy? Do we have a disorder that talks about arrogance? We have narcissistic personality disorder. That's a very strong pathological approach. What if somebody has arrogance? We know as Muslims, even a mustard seed worth of arrogance in our heart is going to doom us to hellfire, right? But how many psychologists will treat that level of arrogance? And we had people like Izzuddin Abdurrahman bin Ahmad al-Iji, in his book, he talks about, again, akhlaq. He calls it the shajarat al-akhlaq, right? Where you have these forces inside of you. You had the quwa aqaliyya, quwa ghadabiyya, and quwa shahwadiyya. And these are the ones that are acting. And we come to our mashallah, master psychologist, Imam al-Ghazali, his Ihya al-Ulum, these 40 books that he wrote. May Allah bless him and may Allah give him reward for this, because it's a guide for us. It's especially as psychologists, if you open up Ihya al-Ulum, you will see page after page this enlightenment that he has given to us as a source. This is obviously, he's by no means perfect, but through his work on himself, he was able to extract. And that's also important. How often nowadays do psychologists work on themselves? How often are we told to work on ourselves? So he talks about, the Muhlikat and Munjiyat. He talks about in his Ihya al-Ulum, the 4 books are divided. The 4 quarters of the 40 books. You have the quarter on ibadat, worship, and adat, practices, and Muhlikat, vices, and then Munjiyat, virtues. So vices, he talks about the shahwatayn, the 2 desires of the stomach, in appetitive desires and sex. Now he talks about anger, malice, envy, greed, and love of wealth, fame and hypocritical ostentation, pride and vanity, and deceit. In Munjiyat, he talks about repentance, patience and thankfulness, fear and hope, love, sincerity, vigilance, contemplation, and remembrance of the death and hereafter. So, it's important to keep in mind from a spiritual perspective, right? We have health and wellness, right? And we also have the spiritual faculties that he mentions that are, that are limbs, right? So it's important to maintain and to work on our spiritual aspects through knowledge, and even things, for example, when Ghazali talks about concepts of anger, when he talks about desire, it's important to keep in mind that he doesn't, or even a lot of Muslim scholars, they don't talk about like how anger is all bad for you. For instance, they mention that anger is meant to be something that we can use for the sake of Allah. Some anger is healthy, but on the other hand, it has to be something that needs to be controlled, right? Desires, we can mitigate our desires to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's too many desires are unhealthy. I want to actually go to our Muhlikat and Munjiyat because we don't have a lot of time. That's why I'm skipping over this, but you can read this as when you get this presentation. So with Muhlikat, he mentions, and this is hirs is an important characteristic that we need to rid ourselves of, right? And he calls it the mother of melodies. Like it's insatiable. Once a person becomes a haris, he is unable to overcome his own desire of becoming of having this greed. There's a hadith where Rasulullah, he said, the son of Adam ages while two things become younger and younger in him. One is greed for more wealth, and the other is greed for more life. Right, so it's a part of our existence that continues on if it's left untreated, especially. And Imam Ghazali mentions that the way you can remedy that, the way you can overcome that, is by reducing your expenditure, forgetting about the future, recognizing other people's disdain, for the greedy, keeping the company of the awliya, visiting the graveyard, and reminding yourself of death. Right. Actually, in fact, I had a client who, surprisingly was not a Muslim, and he had this problem where he was trying to get some treatment for something, and also some benefits, and it wasn't that he was greedy, but he had a lot of discomfort with the possibility that he may not have enough money as he goes into retirement. So one of the practices that I had with him was that he would go visit the graveyard and sit and think and contemplate on what will happen to him when he's laying down in his grave, and how that then changes his perspective and how he views the world. So, these are important remedies that we can even apply clinically. Anger, right? So, anger is an emotion that dominates the intellect. It is natural, it is involuntary, but it is controllable. That's the part. So, oftentimes people talk about, I know a person in Pakistan, they call him like short fuse, right? He goes from like a 0 to 100 without even realizing it. That's not the case. It's because of lack of awareness, right? The person does realize it. I mean, that doesn't realize it because they're not aware of it. But anger oftentimes has a progression. And Rasulullah said in a sound hadith, right? He said, that a strong man is not the one who defeats another in a physical combat, but indeed the strong one is an individual who controls his self, his nafs at the time of anger. And we know how people dissociate when they're angry. We know how people tend to have, they make decisions when they're angry that they regret later. So some of the remedies that are recommended in Ihya, for example, is exercising your willpower, recalling the anger and the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not making any decisions when you're angry, not passing on any judgments, using cold water. I was reading just recently about what happens when you take cold water and you splash that in your face. It's called a diver's reflex, and it immediately lowers your heart rate, right? Immediately. And then it increases it depending on the temperature of the water. But that immediate reduction in heart rate, which we even see if you go to a psychiatrist and you tell them about anger, they oftentimes give you propranolol, which is a beta blocker. What does a beta blocker do? It lowers your heart rate, right? So our Rasulullah also talked about using cold water to overcoming anger, diverting your attention with some different type of activity, meaning changing your position as well. and then avoiding the presence of the source of anger. When I work with couples, I often tell them, if you begin to feel angry at each other, leave each other. Just let them be for a little bit, even if it's 10 minutes, but don't be in each other's company, because that is going to exacerbate your anger. Hasad or envy, it's displeasure with another's blessing and desiring its elimination. It's not the same as ghibta. Ghibta is okay, where you don't want someone else's wealth or their whatever be taken away, but you also want it for yourself. But with hasad, it's like you want it to be removed from the other individual. And that's the difference. It stems from pride, it stems from deceit, and the love, hubb dunya, love for this world. And Imam Ghazali recommends that people that you have envy towards, it's good to have praise towards them. It's good to try to find within yourself the ways to respect them. You should make dua for them. Making dua for them would also remove that hasad from your heart, and inculcate content with destiny, abstinence from this world. So being, having this rida bil qada, right? That whatever Allah has given me is my destiny, and by my submission to Allah is acceptance of this, that which He has given me. Reflecting over problems associated with that which you envy. If I envy more money, more money, more problems, right? That's the old saying as it goes in the US. If I desire more, some political power, if I want to become the prime minister or the president, then that comes with its own problems as well. Some of the quick cures that he talks about for envy, the individual that you have envy towards, be the first one to say salam to them. Meet them before and after a journey, because the journey actually is a good reminder for us of the temporal existence of this world. Give them gifts, praise them in gatherings, invite them over for meals, make abundant dua for them, right? And stop those who backbite about them, right? These are some of the quick remedies that he gives. Bukhul or miserliness, right? Another hadith, the miser is far from Allah, far from paradise, far from people, and close to the fire. This is when you're not able to absolve the debts of the impoverished. You're getting upset when a guest spills something, for example. You're haggling in issues of charity. You're giving shoddy, inferior, things in charity, right? You're so bakhil that you're not able to, choose for your brother what you choose for your own self, especially those who are poor. Constant remembrance of death can be a good remedy for this. Realizing the hatred of that people have towards the misers, and nobody likes the bakhil individual. That's and people recognize these things. People are able to pick up on these aspects. So if you're not afraid of Allah, Imam Ghazali often uses in his Ihya that use other people for that advantage. If it helps you become a better Muslim, then there's nothing wrong with it. Although that sometimes can become a source of our intention, and almost like a hidden form of shirk. So we have to be kind of mindful with that approach as well. Riya or ostentation, right? And we know that this is something that is condemned in many ahadith, right? So verily, even a little ostentation is shirk. This is where the intention is to enhance your own dignity in the eyes of the people through acts of obedience to Allah, right? So even when I'm presenting this, if there's riya inside of me, that is that I'm trying to somehow look more intelligent or somehow present myself as more. And in the Sufi tradition, we see even a group, although many Sufis are not fond of this, but this Malamatiya group, right? These people who would on purpose do some acts in public, right? There's a story of a famous sheikh who was traveling and he went to a city, and all these people started gathering to greet him and said, wow, this is mashallah, the sheikh is coming from the city and he's very pious. So he starts urinating. He starts urinating in public. And why is he doing that? He's trying to bring his own self down, because his own ego was getting so higher and higher that he says no. He does something to himself. Mind you, like I said, many scholars and Sufis even don't recommend doing that. But the goal behind that is to kill your own riya, your own pride, kibr, for example. And then if you have a concern to display or even conceal an act, for example, for the sake of other people. So Imam Ghazali recommends, performing non-congregational acts of worship in solitude, right? Those that we don't have to do in congregation, like nawafil or sunnah, for example, or making dua or dhikr, do them in solitude. Don't do them in front of people. Performing the act in which ostentation is feared in abundance. So doing as much as you can, especially in solitude. takabbur or pride, which is linked to ostentation. I mentioned this hadith before. The person who has even a mustard seed of pride in his heart will not enter paradise. This is when you take offense when others don't greet you first, for example, feeling insulted if others don't show you respect, being annoyed when someone admonishes you, refusing to concede the truth after realizing you were wrong. And the remedies recommended are reflecting on Allah's majesty, treating inferiors as equals or even as superiors, and giving up in a dispute, give preference to others in gatherings and not to your own self, accept invitations of even the poor and associate with the poor as much as possible, and wearing humble clothing, because clothing can have this like inner effect where you start beginning to feel like you're something if you're dressed in a certain way. Switching our gears to Munjiyat now, to the praiseworthy attributes. Tawheed, and this kind of ties into all of them, because if our belief is that there's no one worthy of worship except Allah, then all of our desires, all the things that we work towards, ostentation, riyah, everything goes away, right? So, this like this high level of unity of actions, for example, like Tawheed of Ali, to have strong faith in the fact that without the will of Allah, nothing can happen. And this comes through contemplating the weakness of creation and the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we are nothing but faqir, we're nothing but powerless individuals, and Allah is the one who has, kulli shayin qadir. He has power over everything. Sincerity or ikhlas, to only intend Allah in your act of obedience, right? So, to have this intention that I'm only doing this for the sake of Allah. I work with couples many times, and that's the key concept I teach them. Whatever you do, for God's sake, do it for God's sake, do it for the sake of Allah. Keep that intention that I'm doing this to please Allah and not to please my partner, because your partner may not be pleased. What if your partner has low vitamin D? What if your partner is just unhappy because of something else? You do something to make them happy, they're not happy. How will you react? This will break your heart. So do it for the sake of Allah and you will not be disappointed. And there are different degrees of sincerity. So for example, to have no motive, religious or worldly, would be one aspect of it. To please people but not for the worldly gain, would be another. And then to please only Allah without any motivation for creation. Imam Ghazali, for example, talks about fasting, and he talks about these 3 different layers as well, that some people fast just to keep away from hunger, and some people fast, the second level he says is to stay away from sinning, to not sin. But the third one he says is that a true fast is the one where your heart is always connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially while you're fasting, but throughout Ramadan. So there's always a deeper level that Imam Ghazali goes into in some of these. He goes into very esoteric arguments when he talks about even something as basic as fasting or prayer to us. And this is acquired through eliminating ostentation. Repentance or tawbah. This is oftentimes seen as the first stage, first maqam that even a Sufi disciple or a murid has to go through. But we know something as clinicians, that there are a lot of people who come to us with a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. They've done things that are wrong. They are doing things that are harmful to them. So, bringing tawbah back into the picture is important for us. The regret and the sadness that comes in the heart when remembering a sin, and the conditions are recognizing the sin, regretting the sin, and then having resolution or resolving it. This repentance should ideally be immediate. Most of these positive aspects, the more immediate they are, the better. Like sabr, for example, right? Patience, we'll talk about that. The rights of others also have to be resolved. Just because you've done your tawbah, but the other person's heart is still broken, you have to make remedy for that as well. Imam Ghazali offering 2 rak'ah of repentance, of tawbah, repenting with both the tongue and the heart, repenting, fervently, crying or even attempting to cry. We know this through psychology as well, right? There's the famous experiment of when they ask people to put a pencil in their mouth just to force a smile, that changed people's mood. When you force yourself to cry, when you force yourself to smile, that in itself has an effect on our emotion. So, just even pretending and forcing yourself to cry, trying to bring yourself, you will see that your heart slowly move towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, recalling the sins when you repent, and not exhausting yourself about the sins for which you have repented. this is where the unhealthy guilt and shame comes in. The scholars talk about how oftentimes when we have repented, our belief is that we are forgiven, but yet we continue to think about the sin. Then the thinking about the sin becomes a veil between us and Allah's forgiveness, right? So the idea is that you're not supposed to think about it too frequently. You might have some thought about it later, but not too frequently, because it is unhealthy. The love of Allah, right? This is a beautiful dua that the Messenger of Allah taught us. He said, Allahumma inni as'aluka hubbaka wa hubba man yuhibbuka wa hubba amalin yuqarribuni ila hubbik. That, Allah, I am asking for your love and that which brings me your love, and the amal, the actions that bring me closer towards your love. This love for Allah is an important aspect of our existence. Some other day, maybe inshallah, we'll talk about how love of Allah or the idea of God image is created in the hearts of individuals through their early childhood experiences with their parents. But that love of Allah has to be something where your heart is inclined towards something that gives pleasure to it, through the love of Allah. And there's a natural non-volitional love, and there's an intellectual love. Yeah, right. The more you become the Gnostic, the Arif, right? Those are ulul albab, right? They are the ones who have the greatest love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's acquired through dhikr. Dhikr is an important remedy. There's even psychological research on dhikr. Talking about dhikr in our therapy sessions, especially those who are Muslims and who believe, and then how do we use that dhikr to bring in, so I was working with a client a few weeks ago. We talked about the idea of doing like La ilaha illallah and tying that with the breathing. The Naqshbandis talk about this all the time too. How do you breathe in and you say La ilaha illallah, and you hold your breath in your belly. They talk about this belly breathing. This is before the modern idea of like a deep diaphragmatic breathing comes in. But you hold that breath in and you repeat La ilaha illallah, La ilaha, and you reflect on La ilaha illallah. When you say La ilaha illallah, you actually mean it. When you say La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, you're thinking about how all power and authority belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that is that contemplation over the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then compliance with Sharia, right? I mean, all of these like Sufi orders, if we ever come across a Sufi teaching that goes against the Sharia, it's not meant to be a true Sufi teaching, right? So all these scholars, they were strong adherents of Sharia, and they were proponents, and they also talked about this as an important step towards having a high status. Zuhud, or abstinence, being refraining from an object of desire in the pursuit of a nobler objective, right? Refraining from the desire of the world and pursuing the desire of the hereafter. And they even go like refraining from the desire of the world, right? So that's the next step after you're able to overcome the basic desires. And this is hard for us, right? Like we live in a world, in a society that is constantly built on our desires, right? Every year the new iPhone has to come out. They have to add a new feature, otherwise people start canceling Apple, for example. And that's how they make money. That's how they become $1 trillion company, is by building on our desires. So the opposite of that is zuhud, to refrain from it. The basis of zuhud is this light from Allah that's inspired into our hearts. And we don't have to go into the light, the nur of Allah, but Allah says in the Quran, Yahdillahu binurihi man yasha. Allah guides whomever He wills through His light, but that light of Allah that even Ibn Arabi talks about. And then the effect is that contentment upon the bare necessities, right? Being okay with it. Having this qana'a over whatever, the qana'a of faqr, or the contentment of the poverty, is actually an important aspect of self-purification. And it's not meant to be abstaining from your pleasures or reduction of your pleasures, right? But it's diverting that pleasure toward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the acquisition is done through mediation. So mediating the the defects and the harms of the world, reflecting on the benefits and the everlasting nature of the hereafter, right? Trying to separate ourselves from this world as much as possible. Tawakkul, trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the heart's inherent trust in Allah alone. And that doesn't mean that obviously you give up on doing anything, right? If I'm going to sit here and not do anything and say, I have tawakkul in Allah, that's not how the world works. That goes against the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and this dunya. And to follow the directives and commands of Allah, and to resign yourself solely to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the three fundamentals of trust are ma'rifah, hala, and juhud, right? This gnosis or understanding or awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and attributes, reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and going through toil, like going through struggles. It's acquired through contemplating on the bounties of Allah. I mean, I think you can go look up on the literature on gratefulness, right? How even a grateful, like journaling about your gratefulness every night can have a positive effect on your psychology. This is in positive psychology in modern mental health often spoken about, right? And qana'a, right? This restraint over this complete abstention from desires, right? This complete acceptance of that which comes from Allah. And this comes through understanding the nature of the dunya as well. This dunya is meant to be a temporal world. Hilm, or forbearance, to hold in check the self in the face of distasteful events, right? And this is part of sabr as well, which is the next slide. And sabr is important to have it, like I was saying earlier, right? I think it's the hadith I want to say, but maybe it's a saying, in the sabr and the sadmat al-ula, right? Indeed, the true sabr is that which is in the beginning steps of difficulty, right? So having this control over your nafs in the face of difficulty, when you're not able to have what you want and desire, the desires are not being fulfilled. And there's three types of patients, like sabr ala al-a'mal, sabr fil a'mal, and sabr anil a'mal, right? So ala al-a'mal, fil a'mal, and anil a'mal. So the patience in the practice of good deeds, patience while engaging in good deeds, and patience in refraining from the unlawful. And saying inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, right? The times of difficulty. And even, like, for example, if we lose something, we're supposed to say that because it's a reminder at the end of the day that everything belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this comes through weakening the desires of lust and emotion. And shukr, right? The acknowledging that all beneficial things are from Allah, and being happy with Allah's decree, and ready for obedience towards Him. And this is manifested through constant praise of Allah with the tongue, through dhikr, external gratitude through using His favors to obtain His pleasure, and avoiding using His favors for His disobedience. And in the beginning, it could be intellectual, right? Where you kind of have to like think about it. Like, let me remind myself, and then become thankful and become grateful of Allah's. And this is where the daily gratitude journaling can come in. But eventually it comes to a point where you're in the state of shukr at all times. You're able to, you're just thankful without even having to think about it. And again, this comes through muraqabah, contemplating on the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think there's just a few more left. There's three more left. Sidq is truthfulness, so steadfastness, developing an acquired rank until it is perfected. This includes your actions, your speech, and even your hal, your state and your condition. Knowing the factors that produce perfection, being always alert and ready to compensate for shortcomings, and constancy in improving your own act, right? That Allah, the most beloved actions in the eyes of Allah are those that are small, that are consistent, even if they're small, right? So they don't have to be huge actions. Having rida and contentment towards Allah, Allah's decree, this total submission towards Allah's decree. That's part of being a Muslim. That's what being Muslim entails. And the effect is that you have a peace of heart. This is in the beginning an intellectual contentment, but later it becomes almost like this natural contentment. And this comes through again through the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And finally, the annihilation or fana. So we talk about fana. Fana certainly doesn't mean, when we think fana, sometimes people say, oh, you see Sufis in these grave sites, and they're just kind of like, in this like majzubi, hal, and they don't even know what's happening to them. No, fana means that you remove evil attributes from yourself, the lowly attributes from yourself. That fana or annihilation of the humanly animalistic basic desires that are inside of you, the characteristics and attributes that are part of you. Now, and then they talk about the annihilation of the annihilation, right? The fana al fana, or what is Imam Mujaddid al-Fisani talks about the idea that when when you get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through annihilation, then there's like the concept of baqa billah, then you are existing with Allah, then you come back to the creation, and that's where you're following the Sharia. Obviously you're following it throughout, but the point is that now following the Sharia becomes part of your natural existence, because you're living through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, this comes, the way you can get closer to Allah is through fulfilling your fara'id, and also abundant dhikr, and also constant fikr, this contemplation that is constant on the bounties and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So anyway, I will end with that. This is my email address here. This link also has some other links to my social media if you're interested in contacting me. I thank you for your time. And this is a beginning of this conversation. And as psychologists in the field of Islamic psychology, I think it is a responsibility upon us for us to bring this into practice, bring this into research. So jazakumullah khairan, and we'll inshallah end with that. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khairan, dear Ustad, dear Dr. Fahad Khan, mashallah, such a thorough presentation. I think I speak for all of the participants that we have benefited so much from your presentation, lecture, and vast amount of experience. You gave us a historical, kind of like a historical journey into what was and is psychology, and then to also give us a lot of gems from our Islamic tradition when it comes to removing vices and working with virtues from the akhlaq tradition. Round of digital applause to dear Dr. Fahad Khan. I know a lot of people have really enjoyed and benefited from it, and we have a lot of questions to you as well, dear Dr. Fahad. So without any further ado, let me just inshallah address some of the questions to you. So we'll start, Dr. Fahad, with Sister Aisha. She is asking, I had a client who would stick her face in an ice bowl when her anxiety was peaking. Okay, so this is just a reflection. So yeah, exactly, Sister Aisha. Brother Adil is asking Dr. Fahad, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. What is the Islamic perspective on shifting realities and astral projection when it comes to muhlikat in clinical practice? Is it permissible?
So I can't give a fatwa on that, but I think I'm not a scholar, to be able to do that. But I think this kind of lies in the same realm as even like using, psychedelics. Like some people argue that perhaps the earlier Sufis, would use some kind of substance or had access to it, that they were able to, kind of shift their realities. Like if you take LSD or MDMA, it kind of breaks your reality. My understanding is, again, this is not a fatwa by any means. My understanding is that there's a reason why these substances are considered haram. If you induce this, if you're able to induce it without a substance, it would still be haram. I would say then it comes down to how much of a break you have from reality. We have to keep in mind, nowadays we find a lot of these shortcuts, right? If you do this, then this happens. And if you're able to do this, then people try to do these we have all of these muhlikat, these vices inside of us that we need to work on, but we're trying to shift our reality and get a break from reality. And we think somehow that shortcut is going to make this path quicker for us, and we're going to become better individuals. It can almost backfire. I've had individuals who took LSD and they got stuck in that trip, and it's been years. Like they're still so like that break from reality. It's not meant to be something that's normal, right? When you go into a deep state of contemplation and dhikr, there's going to be a break from reality. But if it's induced by a substance or even a state which can prolong, that can be very, very harmful and dangerous, and especially for those who suffer from something like bipolar or schizophrenia. So I would say the only time I would think that would be okay clinically, not Islamically, is if there is supervision and guidance that is there. If the guidance is not there, supervision is not there, through someone who's experienced, like the use of MDMA to treat PTSD, I'm all for, as long as you follow the protocol of having two therapists there. It's a structured treatment. It's not just someone in their own room taking it. That would not be okay. And there's reasons, Islamic reasons behind that, because that break from reality it's harmful in the moment, but it can be harmful in the moment, but it can be destructive over time.
Jazakallah khairan for a thorough answer, dear Dr. Fahad. So we move forward to next question. It's from Sister Faiza. She's asking, Dr. Fahad, does anyone have any recommendation for Islamic psychology reading materials that can be used in treatment of children with mental health difficulties? I know that we shared some links in the chat, but do you have any nasi on that, Dr. Fahad?
I mean, I don't know about any literature that specifically is written for children, but I think that the things that we can look at when we work with children, my feedback, and you can even take some non-Muslim literature on this as well. I earlier spoke about God image and development of God image through human connections, right? So the object relations theories and a lot of the psychodynamic theories talk about the idea that human beings, when they're developing in early formative years, there's a connection that we have with our caregivers. Now, these aspects that we look for, so how does a child know what is forgiveness? How does a child know what is punishment? It's through their connection with their parents. And so when a child grows up, if that relationship is unhealthy, then they will have an unhealthy relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a lot of research that Christians have done on this, and Muslims need to do some as well. So I would say focus on that, right? How is there not how do they see Allah, because a child might be too young, but how do they connect with their parents? Work with parents to make them understand that, if you're overly punishing or overly permissible, that could be harmful. I don't know, unfortunately, of any books that you can utilize at that time. But even using behaviorism as at least understanding, rewards and punishment, the concept, rewards and punishment, even informing the children. Children are very intelligent, just to keep that in mind. Even talking to them about the harmfulness of, like, I've had a child, I had a client who was addicted to screens, and all I did was I sat with him and in few sessions went over the harmful effects of screen exposure, and the child stopped using that. So sometimes it's, even once you have that trust developed, even bringing some important concepts into the picture, of making them understand how some things can be harmful, what is the harm of immediate gratification, how that can affect them as adults. So I think depending on the child's age and what's happening, that's there, but I don't know of any book, unfortunately. I wish there was. And inshallah, that's something that we can work on. And if you have experience working with children, then I would urge you to do that as well.
Inshallah, we can take upon the task and do it in collaboration with you, Dr. Fahad. Thank you so much. Important to have these resources. Then we have a question from Sister Fatima, dear doctor. She's asking, Dr. Fahad, what can a therapist do to help a client suffering from too much fear of Allah and deep-seated shame, often ingrained through transference of relationship with authority, primary caregivers?
It's a good question. Obviously, it's going to take a lot of work. But as Muslims, we know that fear is balanced through hope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I would go back. I would go back to not only the earlier experiences, but also if you look into the theories of emotion-focused therapy, and in our book we have a whole chapter on emotions. The idea of helping the client understand their emotions, recognize their emotions, recognize the adaptive nature of their primary emotions, bringing it back to them, and sometimes using, even like I use two-chair dialogue in my clinical practice. So using some of these emotion-focused techniques to have them, and sometimes you have to enhance that emotion inside of therapy session. You have to kind of almost like increase it for you to understand, for the client to understand what's happening and why is it happening. And then going back to, like I said, early experiences. So how did that fear, that hope develop? And it developed possibly, and almost always it's through the earlier, like the sister mentioned, with the primary caregivers, some of the ways that they may have treated the clients, some of the schemas that were developed early on, and addressing them. And it takes time. I think it takes a lot of time, but slow kind of progression towards, one of the human nature is that, like I said, we're reactive by nature. Muslims aren't supposed to be, and we're not supposed to be reactive. But what happens is that something happens and we react to it. But what we can do as therapists is that we can say, look, whatever happened, now an hour later, 2 hours later, you need to think about it. You need to bring in this fikr, this contemplation, and break that down and see, why did that happen? What is that related to? Now, in the beginning, it might take 2 hours to do it. It might take 1 hour later. But slowly, as you work on this, and this is a common practice, the difference between taking an action and contemplating on an action, it becomes less and less, and you're able to contemplate in the moment. I'm about to do something. I know based on my past experience that this is the reason why I do this. This is harmful for me. And then that's how people are able to oftentimes prevent themselves. But it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. You're muted, Jamal.
Barakallah fikum, Ustad. Thank you so much for your response and for your answer. So we have a question from Sister Yasmin. She is writing, what's the difference between hilm and sabr?
I would say hilm is more of this ongoing. I mean, it's good to pick up Imam Ghazali and do some deep reading into that as well. I'm sure he goes very deeply into it in his book. But hilm, I would say, is more of this state that you're in, where you're able to overcome the challenges, the ongoing challenges. This forbearance, right? What does forbearance mean? That you have this strength and resilience to not even feel the effects of a challenge. And sabr is especially when there's a sadma, right? When there's some kind of a calamity that takes place. And in that calamity, where even the most pious individuals, like, Rasulullah, when his son passed away, he cried, right? So even the most pious individuals will go through, some kind of a shock. But how do you react in that shock? What do you do? How do you practice sabr in that? So وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, give guidance to those who are patient. Who are those? الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ, right? When they are faced with a calamity, قَالُوا إِنَّ لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ, they say that we belong to Allah and to Allah will we return. So sabr is more related to like an event or something that takes place that is extreme, that is unexpected. It's a trauma. But hilm is a more of an ongoing state that you can be in. I believe that would be a good way to define it.
Barakallah fikum for the clarification, dear doctor. Sister Iman from the Philippines, she is writing, are there gratitude interventions that is based on the Islamic tradition? For example, shukr. Would it be more impactful than secular gratitude interventions?
I mean, I think gratitude itself is impactful. I would say the Islamic aspect of that would be like, when I'm grateful for something, I say Alhamdulillah, right? So like sometimes, like when I buy my children food, burgers or fries, and they say thank you to me, thank you, Baba. I say, look, also say Alhamdulillah, because Allah is the one that gave me the authority, the power, the money to be able to buy this for you. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be able to buy it for you. So I would say that tying that gratitude towards Allah. So the modern psychology literature will say just being thankful, because your mind has a tendency to focus on negative. So you're bringing the mind's attention towards positive, which is good. But I think one step further we can take that is, how do we tie that towards Allah? I'm grateful that, like even though right now my throat is hurting, but Alhamdulillah, overall I'm in good health. And I'm grateful to whom? Towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The modern psychology doesn't end that sentence, right? So they kind of, leave that open. Like, I'm grateful, but grateful to whom? Towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I think the gratitude journaling practice is a very beneficial practice regardless. And obviously that tying that towards Allah will be based on a relationship that the person has with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
MashaAllah. It's so important what you're mentioning, because if we look at like some aspects of third wave CBT, or like the mindfulness conceptualization of West, it's very horizontal. It's not vertical at all. So I really appreciate that you're highlighting the vertical aspect of it from an Islamic perspective of, for instance, gratitude, or all of our conceptualizations.
Yeah, like forgiveness, right?
Yeah,
Forgiveness
exactly.
is an important thing, that even when you've gone through a trauma and somebody has traumatized you, forgiveness plays a huge role in overcoming that trauma. But why do we forgive? We have to forgive for the sake of Allah. We show mercy to those in the earth, and Allah will show mercy to us, right? So it's not just forgiveness for the sake of forgiveness.
No, exactly. Barakallahu fikum. Such a great and important reminder indeed, Doctor. Barakallahu fikum. Brother Salim from the UK, he is asking, what is the interaction or involvement of shaitans or jinns to patients who need psychological treatment? Is there a relationship between such afflictions as magic and ayn and hasad to patients who suffer from psychological problems?
Again, that's not my area of specialty. I mean, you'd have to go to a amil or, a raqi to ask that question. I can tell you our aqidah is that, jinns do exist. I mean, I think if you start from the most basic aspect, that's our aqidah, that's in the Quran, jinns exist. We also know from hadith and even from the Quran that they whisper. they whisper thoughts into our mind and our head. And for some people, the whispering might be more severe, like with someone with OCD, and because they're vulnerable to these thoughts, so now the shaitan that's attached to them is using that as a weakness, to keep them busy and engaging in some kind of behavior, which we call compulsions. Now, the question whether jinns can overpower a human or not, I think it's also one that is debated as well within, within the Islamic tradition. So I'm not a scholar enough to say, like which one it is. However, I will say that I think obviously sometimes some issues are purely psychological, and people have a tendency to attribute them to, some like jinn or evil eye or anything like that. Oftentimes I've worked with couples, right? The couples don't want to put any effort into the marriage. They've kind of given up on it, and not because there's some evil eye, but rather they're just lazy. Human beings are lazy too, right? خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, we're created weak. So this weakness overcomes us. We're not ready to put an effort, but then we attribute it to something external, like evil eye or something like that, hasad. And I remind them that, if you were putting in all of your effort, if you're trying, even if you're beginning to try, and then something was happening, then perhaps, but I think that's where we kind of give up, unfortunately. So we have to have, and this is collaboration is a key here. Collaborate with those who are respected in that realm, and talk to them about this. If there's a patient, how do we how do we make sure and rule out that this is not a spiritual illness, or not a through some kind of a metaphysical aspects, and then we come back to like the psychology of it. And I think you can treat someone who might have some hasad or whatever with psychology, and then they can go back and also work. So you can work collaboratively with the Raqi. So I don't know if that answers it.
Yeah, it's important as counselors to have that type of knowledge in your collegial framework, as having it as part of your colleagues that you work closely with, that you got that interdisciplinary approach. Barakallahu fikum, Dr. Fahad. So Sister Sumaira, she is asking, what's the cure for a client to get more anxious when they read the Quran? They have endless doubts, and when they read the Quran, they are afraid to read the Quran and lose their Iman religion.
Yeah, so I mean, yes, like sometimes I think spiritual interventions can also be harmful. So for example, I had a client who had OCD, scrupulosity, and especially when it came to fiqh, he would have a lot of doubts about whether his act was accepted or not, whether something was pure or not. So he was taking a fiqh class, and I spoke with his teacher, at the time, and we came to a conclusion that it would not be beneficial for him to take that fiqh class, right? Like generally, it's good for Muslims. It's part of our should be part of our education system for us to know the rules of fiqh. But for someone who suffers from OCD, that is counterproductive, right? So not all, like if you know somebody who has OCD and will use dhikr or uses dhikr as a or even astaghfar. We're supposed to say astaghfar 100 times a day. That's what the Prophet ﷺ did, even though he had no sins. But that was his practice. That's the sunnah. But if someone's engaging in this practice of doing astaghfar 1,000 times a day, and they still think their sins are not forgiven, that might be a compulsive reaction, a compulsive behavior. So you have to go with where the client's at. And sometimes these recommendations may not be useful. They may actually be harmful.
Great, Nasiya, doctor. Thank you so much. We have a question from Gökçin from Turkey. Yes, like Aisha Noor. Oh, sorry, there's a question before. So Sister Aisha, she's asking, I have some friends who are going to some bioenergy experts. I guess this is like new age things, who claim to treat them with some kind of incorporation of Islamic practices like dhikr and bioenergy. They talk about chakras and various kinds of energies. It didn't sound safe or appropriate for me. How can I convince them to not apply those kinds of practices from a therapeutic and Islamic stance, or should I?
So I would say that I think one of the problems, so let me just be careful about what I say here. I think it all depends. So, going back to our aqidah, I think most of us here who are psychologists or students of psychology, we should take an aqidah course. It's important for us to know what our aqidah is. It's important for us to have colleagues and those that we can constantly interact with that are scholars, so that you can talk to them about these. Like I had a client who was asking about whether it's okay to go to the Amazon jungle and work with shamans, right? So then the question comes up: is shamanism a form of religion, or is it a practice that is haram? So these questions can be answered best by scholars who understand what these concepts are. Sometimes some of these concepts, like doing yoga, for example, is doing yoga against Islam, right? It depends. If you're sitting there and you're talking about like whatever the Hindu religious aspects are that go against Islam, then obviously the practice is not healthy and not good, Islamically speaking. But on the other hand, if you're just trying to do some deep breathing and meditation and having some body postures that contribute to that deep breathing, I don't see any harm in that. But again, I would say this is where the scholar comes in. Scholar who looks at what it is, like this bioenergy thing. What are they doing exactly? How are they bringing chakra? Just because the word chakra comes from, I think, Hinduism, shouldn't scare us automatically. I think we need to do, as psychologists, we have to do more digging. Let's find more information. Let's see what else is there. Let's talk to people, collaborate. Let's talk to scholars. Talk to many scholars. People who oftentimes scholars, they'll just shun things out too. But talk to them. Like some scholars will shun out medication, right? The use of medication. But talk to them and see what is it that's happening here. Perhaps it's just the name. And I must, to give the benefit of that, I might say maybe they've already done the work for you. Maybe they already have consulted with scholars and they're just using a concept. But sometimes it could be beyond the concept, right? Sometimes it could be something that's more, and then that goes into the borderline of whether it's allowed or not allowed.
MashaAllah. So in a sense, Dr. Fahad, as I understand, it's also to see if we can filter it so that some aspects of it could be perhaps aligned to the Islamic paradigm, right? To perhaps have this top-down approach, to be rooted in our aqidah, as you say, to have that solid ground, and then you could actually, in a curious way, engage in other traditions without losing your solid ground. But then you need to have this firm base in order to engage. If you don't, then easily you can go astray. If I understand what you're saying, it's kind of like...
Absolutely.
Yeah, barakallahu fikum. So that's a great nasiyah to all of us who are, practitioners or clinicians, or we're all students as well, of course, or that we need to really strengthen our own, paradigm first, our own knowledge of our paradigm, and then that will led us to curiosity, because many of the traditional scholars in Islamic psychology and Ibn Nafs, they were so rooted in their own paradigm and our paradigm that they could then, start to study or engage in other traditions. So that's great nasiyah from you, Dr. Fahad. Barakallahu fikum. There's a lot of questions, Dr. Fahad. We have 4 minutes left, so I'll take 2 more, inshallah.
Sure.
From Izham from Malaysia. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Dr. Fahad. Based on your experience with clients, is there one main vice that emerges as a root of the issues facing most patients today? And if so, what would that be?
I would say, I think like uncontrollable desires, like nafsani issues is a very important aspect, because like the world that we live in right nowadays, especially through social media use and the way technology is and everything around us. Like we're just so used to instant gratification, and whatever we desire, whatever we want, we take. Credit cards allow us to buy things even when we don't have money. Amazon Prime delivers, in 2 days, to our doorsteps. So we're so used to that. If you even look at the movies, like the Marvel movies, I watched Marvel movies, these superhero movies, but in the beginning, the movies, could be slow, and they had slow, like, at times, and there was a climax, and this would bring in some excitement. The newer movies is always like something happening, always excitement, some cut scenes, and because that's what human nature has become, unfortunately, that we are just so used to pleasing ourselves and our desires. So I think that the work of nafs, and the spiritual illnesses related to the nafs, whether it's anger, whether it's lust, whether it's even especially for men, but also for women, like sexual desires and overcoming them. I think that that's an important area that all of us could be, practicing and should be practicing in our work. And if we live with and work with non-Muslims, we don't have to use the term nafs, but certainly I've worked with non-Muslims and talked about desires and how these desires can sometimes, and not sometimes, often cause problems. And how do we overcome those desires? Somebody who wants to drink a Starbucks coffee every day and pay $7 for their cup of coffee, how is that destroying them spiritually? How is that destroying them even psychologically? I think that work can be done.
MashaAllah. Barakallah feekum, Ustad. So we have a question here from Sister Aisha Shahzad from US. She's asking, how do we develop our virtues while navigating a culture that is dependent on or even furthered by vices?
It's a good question. And that's the challenge. And this is why psychologists need to do it ourselves too, not only our clients, but ourselves. And I think for the first step to all of this is awareness, right? Just being aware and being honest with your own self, not lying about it, right? So this level of awareness, whether it comes through having good suhbah, whether it comes through having a good teacher, whether it comes through having a good spouse, all of them could bring that awareness into your life. I have a car, and I was thinking of buying a new car, and my wife, may Allah reward her for this, brought that to my attention and said, you already have a good car. If you buy a new car, you probably will feel good about it for a couple of days, and the newness of the product, but then you will be under debt for at least 5 years that you have to pay off this car. So I don't think that's a good idea, and I took her advice, and I think she was sincere and had ikhlas in her advice. So having even a good spouse can be beneficial. A good psychologist certainly can help. Every psychologist can have a psychologist. I mean, why not? I have my own psychologist that I see every other week now, but in the past I've seen them even every week. But having that awareness is a key into like what I'm doing right now. My presentation here, how like what vices were activated at what times, and how do I humble myself? If I'm doing this for the sake of Allah, how do I renew my intention? It takes a lot of awareness, and I think right now, because we're all on autopilot, we don't like to sit back and think about some of these things that are happening in the background. So it's important to bring them into the foreground so that we can start to make the change.
Barakallah feekum, Ustad Fahad. Thank you so much. That will be the last question, dear brothers and sisters. There are more questions, inshallah. With your permission, Dr. Fahad, perhaps we can send the questions to you. And when you have time, I know you have a lot to do, perhaps you can answer them. Barakallah feekum. Professor said Dareen is actually also answering some of the questions here. MashaAllah, Professor. Hope you're well. Always honored to have you with us. He's saying in the chat, Bazali summarizes 4 vices as the source of everything. Bahmiya, animal passions; Subuiya, aggressive desires; Shaitaniya, cheating; Rububiya, Kibr, etc. So, Barakallah feekum, Professor. Barakallah feekum, Dr. Fahad. Round of applause to our excellent Dr. Fahad Khan. Such an honor to have you with us. Thank you, everybody, dear brothers and sisters, and all participants for your amazing questions and reflections and thoughts and initiatives. We will love to engage with all of you and support all of you. We will share Dr. Fahad's link and email address. So if you have any question you want to ask directed to our beloved doctor, please feel free to contact him. We also added our contact information. So if you want to join our resource sharing groups on WhatsApp, or if you want to email us, you're more than welcome to do so. And in 2 weeks from now, we'll see each other again, Sunday the 13th of April, when we will have the lecture about Islamic dream interpretation with Dr. Samir Mahmoud. Dr. Fahad, would you like to end the whole lecture with a dua? We will really appreciate it. Barakallah feekum.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulih al-kareem wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. اللهم اكفنا بحلالك عن حرامك وأغننا بفضلك عمن سواك. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من الهم والحزن والعجز والكسل والبخل والجبن وغلبة الدين وقهر الرجال. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Barakallah feekum. Wa alaikum salam. We just want to mention also that Dr. Fahad will be in Turkey giving the TIIP level 1 and level 2 course this summer with Khalil Center. So if you're in collaboration with Ibn Khaldun University, so if you want to join, I did the level 1 last year. I know that Sister Aisha here did it as well. I know some of you were there from Turkey, so feel free to join if you want to do level 1 and level 2. We will share it in all of our groups as well. Barakallah feekum, Dr. Fahad. May Allah give you shifa, by the way. Thank you for joining us, even though you had a sore throat. We didn't recognize anything of that, by the way. It was amazing. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant your cousin success and in life, inshallah, and your family. Barakallah feekum. Send our regards. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum, Ustad. And everybody, thank you for joining us today. I want to thank Sister Fatima and Sister Shireen, as always, for doing such an amazing facilitation. Thank you to our advisory board member, Professor Dareen, and Ustad Zuhal, for always joining us. Thank you to all of our members for our different task forces, Sister Aisha, Brother Abdulaziz, Brother Adil, Sister Eileen. And yeah, we have so many others, so please forgive me for not mentioning all of your names. I'm trying to check the list and see so I don't forget. Sister Mariati, mashallah. Sister Rizqi, so many, Sister Seira, so many great colleagues, and to all of you who joined us, all of our brothers and sisters and members, please join the ISIP movement. This is your family, this is your movement, and you can visit our website, isip.foundation. There you can get more details on how to join and how to be active. We will share our WhatsApp groups for resource sharing, our contact details. If you're interested to be part of any of our local or regional chapters or different task forces, you're more than welcome to join. We're all brothers and sisters serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and also providing, inshallah, khidmah to all of our brothers and sisters by normalizing Islamic psychology and Muslim mental health, inshallah. So if you have any ideas, we're more than happy to support you. I saw some ideas in the chat. Some people want to write books regarding, for